Hello everybody and welcome back to KXP, where we aim to explore the furthest reaches of the cosmos. And we are going to be continuing on the momentum that we did in the last episode, and as you can tell by the title, we are now on our Duna Descent. So, I did a lot of testing, a lot of pre-planning on this one, a lot of banging my head against the keyboard, and this is going to be a challenging mission, and I decided rather than starting with probes, we're just gonna go right on for it and send some Kerbals down. So we're gonna be taking the Duna program, which requires us to plant a flag. That's kind of all that it requires. We don't need to land in several biomes, which like the probes did. Which unfortunately I feel like that would be a good enough challenge, but nonetheless, the challenge for today is to get actual Kerbals on the surface. So we are going to load up with a Mach 1 command pod, and we're going to take a storage container because my goal for this is to set up some ground science from the Great Breaking Ground DLC. Unfortunately, it wasn't being stored in this container, which is weird. It kept telling me to use stock usages for storage, but this was stock, so I was running into a bug that I wasn't really sure about. We do end up tacking on some stuff later, but so I go and I fill up with all these extra jetpacks, only to realize I only planned for one Kerbal to go, so we don't need three. So I gave him a boombox and a golf stick. But that's when I realized I am going to actually need an engineer aboard this craft to come down as well. We want to set up just a few things. The ground slam seismographer is the science experiment that we want to set up primarily, because then we can start taking all of our discarded stages as we approach the surface and start getting science from them. It would be best if we were to take a scientist as well, but I decided for now we're just going to have the two Kerbals in this kind of simplified lander. I did play around with the idea of having it kind of be an on-surface relay station with this giant reflector dish and an aimable antenna. It was fun kind of playing around with this. I haven't used any of these before, so it was interesting to see that you had to line up the path. It was nice. This is part of the near future collection, I believe, but I'll have to do some experimenting with it later. I didn't like the way that it sat up top there, so I decided to go with tried and true R80Bs. Not a lot of science is going to be getting done here. Basically, we're just sending Kerbals to send them to plant the flag, to get the bases going, the basics of the base going, excuse me, and to kind of pave the way for the rest of the program going forward, because we're going to want to send rovers out there. I'm going to want some way to drive around to different biomes and explore. I'm really fascinated with the dust storms. I've only seen one. I've cheated my way into one before, but I want to go out exploring and find a dust storm for myself. So this lander doesn't need much. Basically just is a base of operations for the couple of Kerbals that it will house. So this is basically it. There's not going to be science bays on there. We're not throwing thermometers. We're not doing anything. There's a chance this won't even be able to communicate the science back anyways. So all in all, this is a mission of exploration. And with the lander completely done, we're just going to tuck that all neatly under a heat shield. I am going to lower the ablator later because we don't need to be carrying as much. So I put on an engine plate to try to get some four-way symmetry and put on these nuclear engines for the long haul, but I just wasn't able to connect the decoupler underneath, and when I tried the tri-stack adapter, I remembered just how much of a pain it was to try to get that as an inner stage before. So I just immediately did away with that and went for just a larger fuel tank and larger engines. We're not going to do nuclear on this stage. We'll just do good old-fashioned liquid fuel and oxygen. So I'm going to make sure that my stages are all correctly. I want my drogue chutes to pop before my regular parachutes, and I don't plan on having any kind of power assist for the lander. We're just going to have it all descend by parachute. So we want to make sure that it can. So we're going to set up our action groups real fast, and then we're going to do a test and see how it runs. It was actually a pretty good lander. I was pretty happy with it. There's a few things. I had way too many parachutes on. Didn't need that much. It wasn't that heavy. And then we also need to accommodate for the jettisoning of the heat shield. So we're just going to move everything down a little bit. And so that way we can have that on action group 2. So now that I know that the lander can work, I decided that I'm going to actually double my efforts and take advantage of the transfer window, and we're going to send 2 of these landers. So we're just going to copy and paste it, and we're going to have to do some fiddling with it back and forth. We're going to eventually make this into a subassembly. I'm going to save and resave over it several times because I need to learn that you need to test the lander, perfect the lander, and then save it as a subassembly. But I do it the other way around for a little while, so we do a lot of resaves. Anyways, I'm throwing on some Chickadee and landing engines, but these were meant to deorbit us. I'd like to save my liquid fuel oxygen stage for a later goal, which we'll talk about later. But so that's why I have these Chickadee engines. I figured maybe since the craft is light enough, this will have enough thrust to deorbit us, but I will change it out eventually because they definitely do not. So we are going to save it as a subassembly right now, and then we're going to fix it later. And the reason why we wanted to fix it was because we didn't have enough cockpit seats. And then as I was saving it as a subassembly, I realized I didn't have any probe core on there. And if we're going to want to use Remote Tech's flight computer, which we always do, then we are going to need at least some sort of probe core on board. So these are the Kerbals that I'm going to be taking: Loggersby, Lisbret, Milme, and Henbret. Those are the Kerbals set to be the first ones on the surface of Duna. No particular order, of course. So we're going to load these up with the Breaking Ground science experiments, some solar panels, some communication dishes, the ground pound slam seismographer, whatever it's called, and then some the probe control box to control everything. We don't have the scientists set up to be more efficient on certain parts, but the engineer will be setting up the communication dishes and the solar panels at the most efficient level. So, well, most efficient that they can. They're all at least a level 1 engineer, so it's good to see. All right, so we are going to be getting rid of those Chickadee landing engines and the RCS because it just wasn't good enough. And we're going to do a more brute force method here by taking on some radial decouplers and throwing on our smallest SRBs. Well, not the smallest, the Separatrons are the smallest, but our smallest actual rocket style SRBs. And we're going to bring this along. It's a little bit lighter. It is heavy fuel, but it's a little bit lighter than if we were to make the landing craft have its own landing stage. So these are basically just meant to get it out of orbit, and then the parachutes will handle the rest. We put some lights on there because as I'm plotting this and as I'm doing my test flights, I realized that one of the landers is going to be coming in on the dark side because I'm going to want these on opposite sides of Duna because that is the best way to make the seismographer work at its most efficient, is when you have 2 set up on opposite sides of the planet, or celestial body anyways. So one of them is going to need to land into the dark side, and therefore we're going to need the lights. As you see here, we put the Separatrons on the SRBs because when we tested it, the separating of the SRBs destroyed our communications dishes. So here is me saving the subassembly once again. And went ahead and deleted that because I realized I still had a few more changes that I needed to make. This didn't have any batteries on it to begin with, so it only had like 500 electricity. So we threw on these big ones, throwing on our ladders once again because there is gravity on Duna, so we can't just jump like we can on Minmus to get to the top of our craft. So if we don't include ladders and we end up locking ourselves out of our habitat, we'll be very, very unhappy. So that was a pretty good test. I was very happy with the deorbiting function. I was very happy with the landing function, all that. The one problem is the solar panels were way too tiny. I don't know what I was thinking having giant communication dishes and tiny solar panels, like generation 3 or 4 solar dishes and generation 1 or 2 solar panels. Ridiculous. Anyways, I'm just picking some IVAs. It's not really a point because we don't do any POV in this episode, but it's always nice to have it set up just in case you find yourself in the IVA mode. I'm missing the communication dishes. They glitched off for some reason during one of the tests, so I'm going to go throw those back on there. And we want to make sure that they don't cover the solar panels, because then what use is the solar panel? So I don't need very long distance communication. This isn't meant to send science packets back to Kerbin. This is mainly just to communicate with the satellite network that will be on Duna. So I decided to go for these smaller, less energy hog of communication dishes. They do a little bit of clipping, but we're just gonna go with it. And they also don't block the solar panel, so that is nice. So we're gonna have these big beefy solar panels like this. I kind of like it. It looks a little bit like a squatting figure, and it's a very different shape than most of the landers that I make. So let me once again delete the subassembly and save it as the same exact thing. And then of course let me test it instead of testing it and then saving it. But here I am stacking 2 of them on top. I'm pretty happy with how they're gonna perform, so I'm just gonna keep going and build the transfer stage that will bring us to Duna, as well as capture among it. And I think I'm gonna want to have some solar panels and some communication dishes, some actual big solar communication dishes on this stage, because we don't need to deorbit it. We can leave it in orbit and just deorbit the landers on their own, since they're both capable. So we're gonna make it just basically be an impromptu relay station. So we get the biggest tanks, not the biggest tanks we have, but the biggest tanks for the diameter that our rocket is. And luckily enough, it lined up to be the same width as the twin bore. And I've used twin bores as side boosters before, but never as the main one. So I was very interested to see how this performs. It says it has a thrust to weight of 1.38. So pretty interested. It did perform quite adequately. It had great thrust to weight, but we ended up running out of fuel right before we needed to circularize, and then I ended up using a lot of the transfer stage just to get out of, not only to get out of the sphere of Kerbin's influence, but to even orbit. So we are going to give it a little more oomph, and I choose these big, heavy SRBs, and we're going to see if we can lift it in an SLS style manner. We did forget to put on the solar panels and the communication dishes, so we're going to go do that. Biggest ones we have, I believe it's 250 gigameters that it will transmit to. Unfortunately, Duna gets past 350 at its furthest point, so this isn't going to be a perfect line of communication. We're not going to always be able to have communication with Duna, not yet anyways, but soon. I throw some lights on the rocket because I do know that our launch window is going to be at nighttime, and I do want to be able to see a few things. So That's why I'm choosing to do that. And we're almost done. We're gonna throw on some Duna flags to commemorate the mission, and that is from the mod pack listed in the description below, available on CCAN, that I put together. Minimalist flags for every Kerbal system. Minimalist Kerbal system flags for everybody. One of those. There we go. So the SRBs just didn't give me... I mean, it got me up there and everything, but I still ended up running out of fuel. So I decided, you know what? Let's just triple it up and go for a fuel duct that goes in between. And we're going to end up using our middle stage to exit Kerbin's sphere of influence, which will give us a huge leg up on the fuel needed in our transfer stage. So I have these two huge communication dishes that can communicate back to Kerbin, but I'm gonna want something to do a little more short range, because we're also gonna want to communicate with Ike, as well as communicate with the other satellite that's already in orbit. So that's why I throw in those little smaller ones. And I do also want to make sure that it has a probe core, so it's not, once we separate, it's not labeled as debris, it's actually still labeled as a craft. I turned down the gimbal on all my engines because there was a lot of wobbliness, and eventually I will need to turn the gimbaling up on 2 of them. The communication dishes, I don't know if you noticed, they were a little off kilter and that had blocked the solar panels. And if you noticed, I didn't notice that I had put those solar panels back into 4-way symmetry. So that'll be a surprise for me later. And be like, oh, why is this clipping through the dish? You can kind of see it when I scroll up. But anyways, we're going to throw some Separatrons on our side boosters just to make sure that we get good clearance as we leave. And then check our flight log. Bill Kerbin snuck his way aboard once again. He just really wants to get out there. And instead of Hembrit, we ended up grabbing Grasky. But Grasky was a pretty fun explorer. If y'all remember from the 90-day challenge, Grasky was the one that joined us midway through. So after all of that, I was not able to afford this rocket. It's a little out of my budget. But if we go over to the mission station, we find out that we actually have a land on Duna contract, as well as this one we're going to take. We're not going to attempt it right now, but if we bring blueberries back, we'll get some funds from that, so that's pretty nice. And now we are going to choose the Duna program. As you see, we need to plant a flag, and that's going to give us an advance of 250,000, which will be enough to launch our rocket. And like I mentioned, all we need to do is plant a flag, so we'll be good. We'll be able to achieve that goal as long as we can achieve that goal. At the very last minute, I decided to throw on some tail fins and return the gimbal control to the side boosters. But here we are, all 4 Kerbals loaded up on the launch pad, nighttime launch in the middle of a storm. But this gives us a great launch window and a very efficient usage of our Delta V. This rocket has no problem ascending and is very easy to control. Very bright in the dark light. Frees up a little bit as our craft passes through the cloud layer and the rain disappears. We'll have to launch one of these launch vehicles in the daytime. And our side boosters flame out. And typically in my test flights, I just needed to kill my throttle here and then adjust my apoapsis, but in this one we must have strayed a little bit from our goal, and we're only at 64 kilometers of an apoapsis, so I'm going to just fire once again and bring that up, so that way we can circularize at a much higher altitude. Go ahead and extend the solar panels and communication dishes on the interplanetary stage, the makeshift satellite that will remain in Duna's orbit. And with about 950 meters per second remaining in the tank, we circularize and start plotting out our escape trajectory. And as you see here, it takes no time to get the closest approach. I fiddle around for it and it doesn't seem to make an intercept, so I'm just going to take the closest approach I can get, and we will make mid-course correction later, because we typically make mid-course corrections anyways, so it doesn't need to be perfect. We are going to use up all the fuel in this lower stage and finally crack into the transfer stage tank. See how the engine is wobbling, and that's even with the gimbal turned down. It has so much control and so much power that once it starts to do a little bit of a wobble, then it tries to correct itself and straighten out, and then that correction leads to some more overcorrection, and that correction needs correction, and so you start ending up with a very uncontrollable mess. We go ahead and watch the explosions as we decommissioned that piece of debris, and we push ourselves forward on towards our goal. We still have a little under 2,000 Delta V left once we end our maneuver. 1959, not bad. So our closest approach is still not an interception, so we're going to focus our view on Duna, make a maneuver just arbitrarily somewhere out here in the middle, and then we're going to adjust our trajectory until we get our desired pass by. So as we see in front of us, we now have interception right there, 42 kilometers above the surface. And so let's use the precise maneuver mod to fine tune and dial it in. I'd like to aim for somewhere around 400 kilometers of the surface. I want, that's what I tested for, was about 450 kilometers above the surface, and that's where I want my satellite to hover. But that also gives us, we know that our solid rocket boosters can deorbit us from that height, from a little bit higher than that height actually, but we want to make sure that we have safety precautions, because if we don't manage to deorbit these landers, then they're going to be stuck in space in probably a terrible orbit. Or if we, we don't need to worry about packing too much because we can always jettison the boosters. But the point is that we want to make sure that we can guarantee that the mission can be achieved. So with our mid-course correction plotted in, let's just warp to the edge of Kerbals' sphere of influence, enter into interplanetary space, and get ready to head to our goal. One of the reasons why I wanted to take the time to rescue all those Kerbals in the previous episode, and there was a couple episodes back, Jeb rescued 7 Kerbals from Midmiss, was because we're going to be doing a lot of time warping now, because we're dealing with different planetary bodies. And as you see here, this maneuver was over 100 days that it's going to take for that craft to get there. And all that time is... when we had our scientists out there collecting the science, doing the research, doing the science lab stuff, they were doing stuff, but if we're not actively working on a mission, then those Kerbals are just sitting stranded for no reason. So we wanted to bring them home before we knowingly set out to ignore the rest of the celestial bodies for years, actually, because we're going to be working on the Duna program for a little bit. We're going to be sending some more things, not just these 4 Kerbals. We're going to give them vehicles to travel around in, signs to do, things to send back. We're going to go to Ike. I like Ike. So we've got 20 minutes until our maneuver, where time warp automatically slows down. We're going to focus our view on Duna, so that way we can see our maneuver come in. And it's a 15-second burn, so it's going to be relatively accurate. We don't have to worry too much. It's nice to see that our scan set is still working, still has electric charge, still scanning the surface. And when I rotated around the planet, I noticed this interesting little shadow, and that is from the lunar eclipse of Ike. But it was really interesting that it dragged itself so horizontally around because of the angle. It wasn't just a circle to be had, a typical lunar eclipse. It would have been interesting to have Kerbals on the ground at that precipice line to see what it would look like to have night on one side and day on the other. But eventually. And that 15-second burn is done shortly enough, and yet, even though it was a long enough time, it was still too powerful and was not accurate enough. So we're gonna kill our rotation, return our control to SAS, point ourselves prograde, and just tap ever so slightly on the throttle to bring ourselves back down to where we want. But we're also coming in at a little bit of an angle, so let's point ourselves normal, and we're gonna hopefully push that up. If it's not the right direction, then we're gonna have to flip around and try the other way, but it is indeed the correct direction. So at 407 kilometers above the surface, we're going to plot in our circularization, and we have plenty of delta V to handle that, so I am very happy. This mission has been going just as I had planned, just as it had in the test flights, and so it's very exciting to see when something comes together and comes together in a way that's very intentional. It's not just that it works, but it works the way that I had tried to make it work, and it's just a great feeling. So we've got another 160 some odd days until our maneuver, so we're going to go ahead and just put ourselves in a cinematic view and watch as Duna approaches. It's that little red dot on the left side of the screen. I'm excited to see what kind of lander we come up with next, because we do have access to better technology. Like, we have bigger command pods, we have larger solar panels and dishes and stuff, and engines to land, but I feel like this is our first go around. I feel like we should keep it relatively simple. Oh, there it is, coming up fast. But yeah, when we land with the intention of coming back, I think we'll have a much larger, beefier rocket as a lander. But for now, I kind of like this simplified Mudlander. Basically, it's with the exception of the fact that it doesn't have any landing engines, and it does have a heat shield. But one thing that's kind of nice, if you look in the top left corner, you see that local control is in green, and that means that, I mean, we have local control because we have Kerbals there, but the fact that it's in green means that we actually have communication right now with Kerbin. Like, if we wanted to drop this probe, we could drop it as a probe, and so that's pretty cool. It's nice to know that, because remote tech is incredibly challenging, so when something works when you weren't expecting it to in remote tech, it makes a huge difference. That was primarily the reason why I chose to do a crewed mission, is because when I was doing my test flights earlier, I initially designed to have the probes land. We were going to do the Duna probe program, but at the time, before we had time warped forward into a better launch window, Duna was so far away, like I mentioned earlier, it was more than the 250 gigameters that we needed. It was so far away that we just couldn't run probes. It just was not going to be a capability. And then we time warped, got closer, and we could get probes, but with some limited control. And at that point, I'm like, okay, well, maybe let's send a Kerbal there to control the probe and land it on the ground. And at that point, you know what? Let's just land that Kerbal. So here we are, closing in our orbit, coming into a stable orbit around Duna's equator. Things just couldn't be better. And there we are. So the hard part of the mission is done. The getting interplanetary is over. Now this is the easy part. I mean, we just point ourselves in the right direction, separate off the lander, fire the SRBs, and hope our parachutes work. So let's go ahead and shut down this engine just so we don't accidentally ruin our orbit. So, Liz Brett and Loggersby are selected to be the first to land on Duna, and the lucky ones to land on the light side, so they'll actually be able to see what's coming up below them. So we time warp away from the main craft, take control of just this. We're going to say goodbye to them for now. We'll be seeing them a little later in the episode, because we're going to do both landings in today's episode. Get some great shots here. It's just so nice to see Parallax in different things. I've spent so much time with the Mun and Mid-Myths, and just not a lot of time with any of the other celestial bodies, so it's just so cool to see. That's the main reason why I started this series in the first place, is because I was tired of only exploring the Mun and Mid-Myths and never really breaking out past Kerbin's Sphere of Influence. It started off a while ago as escaping Kerbin. That was my first kind of third-person view, because I did POV for a while, and so this was my third-person view, was escaping Kerbin. My whole goal was to get to Duna, or anywhere, just to get somewhere outside of Kerbin's Sphere of Influence, because I hadn't gone interplanetary before. And so then, I did, and then, the goal was to keep going. But then I got my computer update, and I got better access to better graphics and better processing and all sorts of stuff. So I'm like, okay, let's start anew. Let's do KXP, Kerbal Exploration Program. And so the goal was, once again, to explore, but not just to escape Kerbin's Sphere of Influence, but to explore everything. I want to see it all. And it's taken us 20 episodes so far. 20 episodes to get to Duna, but within the very next episode, we're putting boots on the ground. The following one, we're going to send some sort of vehicle down to them so they can start exploring the different biomes around there. We may end up sending some more Kerbals as well. We're going to do Ike soon as well. And then once we get a solid footing on how to go interplanetary, I'm going forward. We're going Eve, we're going Jewel, we're going all of the different moons. So there we go. I get my periapsis below 23 kilometers, and then I just jettison the rest of the SRBs. There was going to be way too much fuel. Even in my planning, I always had more fuel than I needed, and I didn't want to lower the amount of fuel just in case I needed to come in at a different angle or a different trajectory or whatever. I had all the options, but those are gone, so there's nothing now that we can do except come back down through the atmosphere. Hopefully we left enough ablator in our heat shield, because we did severely limit it. Hopefully our parachutes are rated to handle, they don't pop early and get ripped up in the atmosphere. Hopefully we don't hit the ground with so much force that our landing gears break. And hopefully we don't land on the side of a hill, because we don't have any way of adjusting our trajectory once we go. This is heading down no matter what we do, so we gotta buckle up. But Liz Brett and Loggersby are both seasoned vets, so they relish the opportunity. A little bit of stitching on the graphics there as we load into different pieces. I am pretty fascinated by this little crater over here on the top left that is filled with dust. We do have the volumetrics cloud mod on, so there are dust storms on Duna, which I'm very excited about. And I think that would be one right there, if we were to land in the middle of that. But that is not our destiny. We have no control, and it does look like we are coming down on a hill. I can wiggle it this way and that, but nothing I can do will help me. And as we plop on the trajectories mod, we do see, in fact, it is not a flat landing zone we're looking at. Our drogue chutes are safe to pop, and now our regular parachutes are as well. So I kill Time Warp, and then I hit both stage, but they wait, they hesitate, so I'm just gonna have faith that they will pop when they need to. I jettison my heat shield, and then I drop it into cinematic mode because there's nothing to do now. Knowing how fast the ground is approaching, not gonna help. Knowing when or if my parachutes are gonna pop, not gonna help. I mean, if we could get the Kerbals out on EVA and have them parachute themselves to safety, but for the most part, if we see our drogue chutes pop, we know we're slowing. If we see our main chutes pop, we know we're stopping. So there's no need for them to rush and exit and save themselves. And there we have it. With all 4 parachutes deployed, not quite opened yet, but all 4 parachutes deployed, we know that we at least stand the chance. Once they open, then we'll know if we are actually going slow enough. Look at those beautiful rocks. I did turn off collision mode, it just wasn't feasible for Duna, so unfortunately those rocks don't have collision, but this hill certainly does. So as they say, out of the frying pan and into the fire, we are no longer in danger of smashing into the surface, but we're not really in a great place to set up a small base. This hill is not going to be able to hold our science experiments. So the courageous Kerbals that they are, they decide to give a little wiggle, give a little roll, and see if they can't find a better location. And knowing full well that this is just as dangerous a maneuver as any they've ever done, because if they start picking up speed going down this hill, I am going to speed up the footage, but if they start picking up too much speed going down this hill, they can very well destroy the entire craft. So everything that they're doing is absolutely dangerous. It would be impossible if we had collisions on, and kind of sad about that, but it wasn't gonna work for the mission, so we had to turn it off. But we also got a lot better frame rate for having them turned off. So Liz Brett goes and does her EVA experiments and crew reports, and then they continue to make their way down the hill. Sometimes you just got to give it a little bit of a wiggle, get yourself a little bit more momentum, and then sometimes you got to do a flop. And this entire time I wasn't able to time warp because if I were to physics warp, run the risk of that or worse. So we go hit the F3 button real fast and see that it was just the ladder that broke. So we're all good. Keep going. See the desert off in the distance. It'd be nice to make it all the way down there, but unfortunately we are actually still very, very far away from that. So they get the go ahead to just find the best location to set up shop and go ahead and rest their bones there. So, not only were they the first Kerbals to land on Duna, but they're the first Kerbals to do a rover mission. Unintentionally roving our way from one place to the other. And after all that flopping, I find myself in a relatively flat-ish area. And this tiny little patch right here will be good enough for us to set up our science experiments and to make sure that we don't go tumbling down the hill. So all that's left now is to get ourselves upright and make it look like we did it all on the first try. And there we have it. We are now fully deployed. The communication dishes should be connecting with the satellite above. As I take a quick look out above, you see we're only halfway down the mountain. There was still a lot more to go before we got to that desert biome. And there was some great risks that they took, but it's more worth it for them to make the achievement of surviving. So they're going to plant the flag. Lizbrat's going to go ahead and hop back into her craft. And we're going to go meet up with the rest of the crew and see their landing. They got to get communications with the first lander the whole way, so they're excited to know that their craft can handle it easily, that their parachutes are more than capable. Unfortunately, they are the ones to be landing on the dark side. So with that, they leave the satellite at its orbit, and we're gonna wait until we get to about 35 kilometers. Just as long as we're below 50, we know that we'll be able to safely come down. But of course, I don't want to come down. I don't want to drop our periapsis much lower than that because I still want to make sure we come out at a decent enough angle. We lowered the ablator on our heat shield, so we don't want to regret that. I'm going to turn the brightness up a little bit, so that way we can see a little more than I can when I did this, but some of the colors may be a little vibrant at their peaks. But it does make the nebula just absolutely stunning. As you can see, I mean, the nebula is stunning to begin with, but just with the little color change, the brightness that I did so that way we can see the landing, really made this pop. I don't have very much experience in color balancing in editing software, so that's something I should probably take the time to learn and maybe get good at, because it was really interesting to see what kind of control I had just with the simple click. It did, however, blow out the HUD a little bit. Everything's a little extra bright there, but we're gonna turn that off, turn the HUD back off in a second. So we are now below the 30-kilometer mark. Our drogue chutes are almost ready to be deployed. We're going down slow enough that we're in no danger of heating up, and our heat shield is mostly ceremonial. So our drogue chutes are available to be activated. So we go ahead and hit stage, but it doesn't activate them, it only arms them. We stage again for our regular parachutes. Break the speed of sound, and we get ready to jettison our heat shield. And once our parachutes pop, the heat shield separates from us cleanly and will impact the surface. I, of course, wasn't able to see anything. I could see my craft in the lights, but everything was too dark around me. So I was very hopeful that everything would go well. This would be live with your consequences sort of situation. If, you know, the landing legs broke, if crashed into a mountain, whatever. If these Kerbals did perish, then it would be them that we'd be remembering. But if we can make this safely, then we don't have to memorialize anyone. And before we know it, we made touchdown. I feel a little cheated from the collision. That should have knocked us over. That would have been funny to see. But once we get a few of our goals done here on Duna, we may revisit the collision situation. But for now, we're just going to deal with it. Can you tell that I really like the collision aspect? But anyways, here we are, landed on the surface once again. Second time, the second set of Kerbals. The solar panels are deployed. The communication dishes should be connecting with whatever it can reach, and day dawns upon them. Of course, greeted first by blue, as is traditional with Duna and Mars. It quickly turns into the glorious orange sunrise we know and love. So excited to be here. So excited that we were able to complete this mission, and I'm so excited to keep going forward. We've got 4 Kerbals on the surface. I want to find a way to get them together. We don't need them in different sides. We can put them all together. I want to give them a rover. I want to give them a plane, maybe a helicopter. I've been having so much trouble with the helicopters trying to do this. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, this is like the 5th hour of my of this whole mission, because the first 3 hours were just a bust. Just you design something and you spend all this time working and it just doesn't work. So you got to go back to the drawing board and you got to keep going until you make something that works. And that's the fun of Kerbal, is when you spend all this time, you spend all this energy and this effort and frustration, and then it just all comes together, and it's just the most satisfying thing. But that is the end of this mission. In the next one, we are either going to send something else down here onto the surface, or maybe we might swing by Ike and see how that's doing. We're definitely going to need more satellites. We're definitely going to need more Kerbals. We're definitely going to need more vehicles. And I'm so excited to push this exploration forward, and I hope you are as well. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more KXP. If you did, please consider subscribing. If you're not already, drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.